Hey everyone, how you doing today? Wazoo back with another video. Today we're going to be going through some of the popular Java IDEs, those development environments that we all just love to customize, fight over, argue about. Anyways, come join the fun and let's go through a few, and maybe we'll see if these are your favorites or if there's some new ones on the list that you wanted to try out as well. Let's do it. So first one that we have on the list is, of course, the one that probably comes up the most in any Google search is the Eclipse IDE. This is probably one of the most, I would say the most popular IDEs out there for Java development. It has been around for a very, very long time, and it's probably the one that gets mentioned just about the most whenever you go through tutorials or videos or anything to do with getting started in Java development. As you can see, it kind of takes some time to load.
3 hours later.
Okay, and I'm just going to move myself here. Maybe right there. Okay, yeah, so let's take a look. So this is what the main kind of dashboard looks like. Just about every single IDE in the list, the layout of their development environment is pretty much very close to the same in each one. There are a few little exceptions between editors, of course, but for the most part, you've got a tree view of your project on the left, and then let's just open a test one up, for example. So you've got a tree view of something up on the left. You've got a code view, usually in the middle pane, and then along the bottom. I dragged it across the side here for another project I was doing a long time ago. But for the most part, your console output, your debugger, variables, breakpoints, and everything are usually in a bottom window area. That's just the default. Of course, like most other editors, you can move these around, move these windows around, and change how you want to stack them, lay them out. Like I mentioned, Eclipse has been around for a very long time. It's been through very many trials and tribulations, I would say. When it first came out, it was quite slow, extremely frustrating to work with at times. It was you had to have a really beefy machine just to load it up and make use of the IntelliJ and other sort of code completion factors within the IDE. This current version now in 2021, let's go to Help About just to show an About screen here. So this is, if you can't make it out, hopefully I can figure out how to zoom in. But if you can't make it out, this is version 2021-03 4.19.0. And so this is probably quite new, depending on when you're watching this video. And I would say for the most part, this is not bad. I do find that one thing to be aware of is most editors, actually just about all the editors, have a configuration data that sort of comes along with it whenever it loads up one of your projects. So whenever you're working, or when you create a new project, or when you load an existing one, it'll save your system and editor preferences in some kind of file format, in some kind of folder. Usually a good idea is having those kind of files in your git ignore file. That way you're not checking them in when you commit a project back to GitHub or GitLab or any other kind of version control software. That way, when other people open up your project, they're not forced to use the same IDE that you were using to develop the project. As well as, not only could there be somebody with a different IDE, but maybe you've got like some very custom setup arrangements to your version of the IDE versus somebody else's. So if they or vice versa. So if you load up a project and all of a sudden it discovers that you've got some of these preferences in a file somewhere in the project, it'll attempt to load it in, and then all of a sudden your setup is changed around, looks completely different, and just creates chaos in your regular day-to-day flow when you're trying to just get some work done. So Eclipse is not too bad. I do still find it a little bit sluggish. It takes quite a while to load. Once you're loaded, it's relatively fast enough to move between files and get everything running. I should also mention that Eclipse comes with a built-in debugger. It's free, it's open source, so you can also make use of doing either C++ or Java development with the same IDE. So it does come bundled with quite a few features. Because of this bundling, as I mentioned before, it makes the download rather large, and it also increases some of this load time, I think. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So another one we're going to talk about is IntelliJ's. That has also been around for quite a few years. It is not a free product. It is not open source. It does come with two versions. There's a community version which is freely available from the IDEA JetBrains website, which is not so bad, and it gives you a taste. It's a good way to kind of trial Java development using the IDE. But in the same vein, it doesn't really give you the full flavor because there's not a lot of debugging support that's built into the community version in terms of some of the way that files are loaded and modified during runtime. Spring Boot, for example. So if you have the development server up and running within the IDE on the community version, it won't be able to detect restarts when you modify any of your classes. So you'll have to constantly manually stop and restart the server to pick up any changes that you've got in your code. There's some little things like that, but I call that as incentive into purchasing the actual ultimate product, which is their obviously purchasable product. I find an extremely well done editor. For what I use it for, I use it across either Node or JavaScript or Java development, Ruby as well, and I haven't had any real issue with the IDE itself. I find it quick to navigate around in. Again, every editor has its own keyboard combinations and quick keys that help you navigate through the IDE and the editors. And different points in your code base, but I find they are somewhat similar between them, not always the same. So if you're flipping back and forth between several IDEs, for example, if you're using Visual Studio Code and then IntelliJ, some of the keyboard combinations are the same but one letter off. For example, in IntelliJ right here, for example, Control-Shift-N on Windows opens up the Explorer to give you to let you choose which file you want to try out that you want to quickly navigate to and open. Whereas in Visual Studio Code, I believe it's Control-Shift-O. So it's things like this. You can create, like I mentioned before, with preferences. You can create preferences to kind of match your keyboard shortcuts between each one, which is a real benefit if you happen to find yourself flipping between a lot of them. So I do recommend doing that if that's kind of what you've been used to. So back to the IDE, I find that again the IntelliJ's IDE is customizable. I'm talking about the paid version here for now. It debugs very well. It lets you step through everything that you want to go through. I find it a lot snappier for some reason than something like Eclipse. Whenever I want to jump between different files, start up a debugger, and just overall general feel of the editor itself, I find that it does seem to move and respond a little bit better than Eclipse does. By the way, I would like to mention that I'm not trying to beat up on any particular editor, aka Eclipse, but it's just it just happens to be one of the most common ones that gets recommended all the time, mostly because it's free and mostly because just about everybody talks about it when you're looking through new beginner stuff. So one thing I will mention in editors, both Eclipse and in IntelliJ, is that they both have extensive plugin support. And so for functionality, that you may want to make use of within your particular development style, you might really benefit from the use of plugins that are available. So this is the plugin navigator for IntelliJ. As you can see there, you've got quite a wide variety of different plugin support available depending on what you're into in developing. So a lot of these will add additional code completion shortcuts to your keyboard bindings, or some templates that you can use for quick starting any particular project. So say like Node.js, something like that, or if you're working with JavaFX or Quarkus. So there's a lot of plugin support available for there. Cool. So another interesting one that I came across before and that I've used through its several iterations of development is one called NetBeans. It's now been rebranded as Apache NetBeans, but it started a few years ago again as simply NetBeans. The actual interface hasn't really changed that much since the very beginning, at least the beginning when I remember using it. A lot of the colorings of the toolbar icons have been the same. This project layout has been the same, with your project and files on the left, code right here on this main pane, and then any output console debugging in this window on the bottom here. And I find it's always been a snappy editor for me. It's loaded up fairly quick, almost faster than IntelliJ's, but definitely quicker than something like Eclipse. I find it easy to navigate your projects in. It's free. It's open source, now using the Apache license, of course, but freely available for multiple platforms. And I should have mentioned before when going through, especially Eclipse. Eclipse is available across PC, Mac, and Linux. IntelliJ is also available across PC, Mac, and Linux, and NetBeans here, Apache NetBeans, is available across PC, Mac, and Linux. So this one's also worth giving it a shot, depending on what your preferences and likes are. I didn't find I can't remember if a configuration file that I talked about is created in your project folder, but I wouldn't be surprised if one is. I think they all do, and that's fine. I haven't seen any issue with that. It is, I do find that there's a fewer plugins available for Apache NetBeans than some of the other editors. There's a lot listed here in their plugin catalog, but at the same time, it may not be for technologies or libraries that you are used to using for development. So I don't know what the actual market share or market share is the right word. I don't know what kind of market share any of these editors have. Just the fact that some of them are still around means that either the company is getting some kind of funding to support it, or they've got some kind of basis for support. But Apache NetBeans is an interesting one because it's very adept at handling more technologies than just Java. It'll let you work with PHP files as well as C++ projects, which is pretty cool. Okay, that's NetBeans. On to the next one. So another interesting one I came across is a project called BlueJay. And it is completely unlike any editor I've used. I don't know if that's good, if that's bad. It is just completely unlike any editor I've used or used to using. As you can see when it loads up, this is what you're presented with. So the navigation with your code files is done all graphically. And so you drill down into your projects through going through each one of these tiles. Now I suppose this might really help anyone who is a very visual worker. If you're used to doing development that way, or if you want to do development that way, then maybe this one will really appeal to you because it's very visual based. As you can see, it almost reminds me a lot of something like those old UML diagrams that everyone used to talk about back in the early days of Java development. As for any actual plugins, I haven't come across much. I think this is it in terms of what the editor does for you. It lets you compile and build your code, of course, but I just find that it's a very definitely a very niche kind of editor. So if this is right up your aisle in terms of your work style, you don't want a lot of anything extra to come along with the editor. You don't want any plugins. You don't want any kind of ecosystem into the editor. You just want a straight editor with some kind of visual diagramming navigation. Then maybe this one is worth a shot for you. As for me, I just could not get very productive with it at all. I find it, as I mentioned when I started talking about this editor, because it's so different than anything I've used, it doesn't really mesh with the way I'm used to thinking about development. But if you're one of those that prefer visual coding, then maybe this one's for you. Give it a shot. It's BlueJay, and this is let's see what version this is. Supported by Oracle, and this is version 5.0.1. And just another reminder, well, maybe not a reminder, but if you, back in the day, if you were used to using a product called JBuilder from Embarcadero/Borland, aka Borland, then you might be surprised, or maybe not surprised at all, to find out that it's been discontinued. As you can see, when I googled JBuilder, I came to this link on the Embarcadero website, and right away the footer, the date, the last copyright date is 2013, quite old, and you can't even select a version to download, which is probably a good thing if they're not supporting it anymore. So just a note that if you're maybe when you originally started development, you heard about JBuilder, and now that you're coming back to working in Java again, you're coming back here to take a look and download it, and well, sorry, it's too late. Another one from the Oracle website is JDeveloper 12, and it's an Oracle product, folks. Alright, my Oracle account. Hey everyone. A bonus editor that I threw into the pile here. Of course, we can't really complete the list without mentioning Visual Studio Code, since I've already mentioned it in a previous editor review, so it's worth mentioning here. So Visual Studio Code is the open source and freely available editor from Microsoft. It has an extensive plugin repository available, giving you a lot of flexibility, a lot of power, and you can go quite a long way in working with Java within Visual Studio Code. There's some really great code completion. There's some really excellent plugins for helping you maintain a server while you are working on your project. I find it's a really great editor to use even when doing demos and these videos, because it really allows you to zoom in and increase the font size of your text very easily, and you get a nice view of the code you're looking at. I mentioned it's free, and it's a really good editor. I find very snappy. It's updated quite often, so there's a lot of support from Microsoft and the rest of the community. One thing that Visual Studio Code doesn't seem to have that other IDEs have is the ability to run a wizard when you want to create a new project. So for example, if you want to create a new Java Spring Boot if you want to create a new Java Spring Boot project, then you need to generate it outside of the editor and then open it from within the editor once you're finished there. kind of a really minor inconvenience, really, as it keeps plugin authors and Microsoft out of the actual wizard / project generation, and it just lets you open up anything that you want to work with. So again, if that's not a big deal for you, then maybe it's worth taking a look at Visual Studio Code.
Two hours later.
And here we are looking at Oracle's JDeveloper. I should also mention, with any editor that I've installed for this video, I kept all default settings as they were upon install. I didn't specialize or fine-tune any of the options that you're presented with during the installation, just to kind of get a feel for the general experience that anyone will get when they download this software. I still find that this product so far feels very Eclipse-ish in terms of just taking a very long time to do anything. Okay, let's see here. Studio Developer, all features, customization developer, database developer, Java developer, or Java EE developer. Let's try Studio Developer. We'll just keep the default there. Okay. Would you like to import preferences from a previous JDeveloper installation? No. Okay. Okay, allow automated usage reporting to Oracle. No thanks. So I turned off all telemetry support in my editors. Again, not a big deal. I understand what it's like to write software, and sometimes making use of telemetry is the only way to get a feel for how users are using your application, but I'm just wanted to turn it off this time is all. Okay, okay. So again, we've got the same editor view that we get in in other projects. We've got a folder presentation area on the left and a code area on the right. I'm not even clear if this is free. That just triggered a memory here. Every editor that I've tried here hooks or has support for just about every version control software out there. So Git, GitLab, or Teams, Microsoft Teams. They're either available in the core product or through free plugins that you can download for whichever editor. The exception there, of course, is BlueJay, which it does not have support for anything like that. I guess what concerns me is when you do an about and you see that the last copyright date in the software is from 2014. I don't know. It kind of raises a lot of red flags for me in 2021, and I think it should you as well. Maybe it's pretty clear that this is not really supported software anymore, or if it is, maybe it's getting very, very little support. So I think that's all we'll bother to go through with on JDeveloper. It looks like out of the box you can only really easily develop desktop Java applications, which are not a problem. I love desktop Java applications, but at the same time I didn't see anything webby related in here beyond just being able to open HTML files. So again, it might be an editor where you're generating your initial project template somewhere else, maybe from start.spring.io, and then just importing it into the application here. Pretty much would not recommend this one from what I've seen. The 2014 copyright stamp on there really causes a lot of red flags and concerns for me, as it sounds like it's not very supported software, and you might be best served even with something free and new and current such as Visual Studio Code or even IntelliJ's Community Edition. So that's my roundup of the available Java code editors out there. I think there's a pretty good crop to choose from, and I don't think you'll be disappointed in any of the options that are out there. I think it won't take you too long to come across one that will really work with your particular development style or preferences. All of these are cross-platform from what I could find out, and so again, I don't think there's too much of a difference in some of them, depending on what your coding style is and etc. What your preferences are when you're doing any development work. If it was down to me in terms of personal preference, I would say that IntelliJ and Visual Studio Code rank higher on my list than something like Eclipse or JDeveloper. NetBeans I would kind of put right in the middle of the pack. I think it's good for a lot of things, and it's a decent enough editor. It's quite snappy and lets you zoom through your project, but it doesn't have some of the same ecosystem and support that some of the other editors have, like Visual Studio Code and IntelliJ's. Again, IntelliJ's is even the community. If you're doing serious Java development, then I would recommend, if you're looking at IntelliJ, just buy the license for the ultimate version. The community edition won't get you very far. A lot of the debugging work is not supported, and you'll be wrestling with it rather than just enjoying your coding sessions. I hope you liked what you saw. This is Wazoo. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace.